He is the world's greatest fictional detective, the deductive genius who could solve any crime, the man who brought down the evil genius of Professor Moriarty. But what most people forget is that he never, ever existed. But that, I suppose, is the power and the magic of Sherlock Holmes. A character who has appeared in over 200 films, has been played by more than 70 actors, and an astonishing 10,000 books have been written about him. So now, I'm going in search of Sherlock Holmes. Meeting those whose lives have been taken over by the great detective, whether they've studied him for decades.
I've been studying Conan Doyle for about 60 years. He produced Sherlock Holmes.
Are attracted to his unique eccentricities.
This is a scandalous man. He's a drug addict.
Or have been lifelong fans.
There was the complete short stories and then the complete long stories, and then I was absolutely hooked.
And as the great man said, the game's afoot.
We have Detective Superintendent Walker from Amit coming in to head the murder inquiry.
For the last 10 years, I've been lucky enough to play the part of a fictional detective in the television series Trial and Retribution.
What the hell, it's Walker. Detective Superintendent Michael Walker, is that right?
Good to meet you. I owe the world of detective fiction a lot, so I want to know what made the first great fictional detective tick, and find out why we still love him today. So the best place to start my investigation is where it all began, here in Edinburgh, where in 1859, Sherlock Holmes' creator, Arthur Conan Doyle, was born at number 11 Picardy Place. To find out more about the environment young Arthur grew up in, I'm meeting with historian Susan Varga.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you, honey.
You
How
too.
are you?
I'm fine.
Great. So you're going to let me out of your secrets?
Oh, well, I'm going to show you some pretty pictures.
Good. Now, Susan, what would life have been like in Edinburgh at that time?
He was born in a real kind of pivotal point for the history of Edinburgh. You'll have heard of the New Town. New Town was a series of developments, and basically that came to an end just as Conan Doyle was born. And what that
So the New Town was brand new?
It was, but you know, it saw the city just explode. People would judge you on where you lived. I mean, here I've got a post office directory, a wee bit like an early telephone book, and they're really, really fascinating. And what we can see here is all the people that lived in Picardy Place in the year that Conan Doyle was born. And you'll see there's a real cross-section of society. I mean, at number 3, we've got a plumber, we've got accountants, a waiter, but then we've got an advocate. And that's what I'm saying, he lived in a real kind of...
A surgeon?
Yeah, a melting pot, because there's middle-class people, but there's, you know, working-class men as well. I mean, I think if you could go back then, and you could see both halves of the city, it would just be incredible, because over here you've got the darkness, the squalor. The New Town, I know when you go down and look at it now, it's quite grey and quite dark, but at the time the stone would have been shining.
Oh, shining, of course it would, of course it would,
yellow
yes.
and white, and they were really proud to be there. And you know, they painted their doors bright colours, their window frames were bright colours. Not like they are today, you know, it's all quite restrained, and you know, it had just been vibrant and bright.
You describe it so well. What a fantastically vivid description of the city Conan Doyle was born into, Edinburgh, with all its brightly coloured window frames. But I want to find out about Conan Doyle's family, and I have to talk to the man who works here at Scotland's National Library. He has devoted much of his life to studying Arthur Conan Doyle. And I've also heard that Owen Dudley Edwards is quite a character. Owen.
How very nice to meet you.
Hello, sir. It's a great privilege. Thank you for seeing me.
It's a great pleasure for me.
Thank you for seeing me.
Do come around.
Thank you. A great pleasure. How are you?
Fine, and yourself?
I'm grand. You're sporting a fine beard, sir. I'm jealous. I'm deeply, deeply jealous. What sort of family was Conan Doyle born into?
Conan Doyle was born into an artistic aristocracy. His grandfather was the greatest political cartoonist of his time, through whose cartoons we can see what the great politicians of the 80s and 30s and 40s looked like. He had various uncles who were into various different kinds of artistry, the most famous of whom, Dickie Doyle, was the illustrator who designed the front cover of Punch. He was somebody who knew that he was involved in a family which thought continually about culture, about storytelling, about writing. And his mother was a great storyteller, and his father apparently quite a good one.
So he may have come from an artistic family, but it seems the streets of Edinburgh could be tough ones. And Doyle had to be able to use his fists as well as his brain.
And Arthur Conan Doyle apparently grew up as the rather tall and strong leader of a street gang, who seemed to be a street gang of fellow Catholics, fighting young Protestants, led by the son of the Baptist minister.
Seriously?
Yes. And in fact, if you want to know where the Baker Street irregulars in the Sherlock Holmes stories come from, it's obviously from there.
Sectarianism in Edinburgh? Young Arthur went from street fighting to Stonyhurst, the top Jesuit public school in England. Owen showed me a piece of writing from about this time.
The very, very first one.
The very first one, we have to assume he was about 17 or 18. And what is very remarkable about it, it's a ghost story, as we might expect. It's set in England, nice, useful country England. A lot of it is a long way away from Scotland.
The Haunted Grange.
Of Goresthorpe. A true ghost story. That, of course, was always necessary if you were telling a dormitory story. But is that story true, Doyle? Of course, you don't think that as a good Jesuit boy I would be telling you lies, do you?
As a treat, Owen then gave me a taste of things to come by showing me a Sherlock Holmes manuscript.
Is this an original?
And this is the original manuscript. It was 1925 when it first appeared.
Very small, neat, relatively neat writing, isn't it?
Isn't it beautiful writing?
It really is.
You would never realize from it he had been a doctor. All doctors are supposed to have very bad handwriting.
There don't seem to be many corrections, Owen.
No, that's very remarkable. Well, he had, you see, Conan Doyle wrote stories organically. He would think of the end of the story, the solution, and then work his way backwards. And also he seems to have written the Sherlock Holmes stories very much from the top of his head. Once he'd thought of them, he sat down and wrote them, and in anything that survived, there's very, very little alteration and change, though the language is beautiful and the structure is most remarkable.
So it's entirely a creative process?
Very much so.
Without warning, Owen started to read from the illustrious client.
As the vitriol attack was concerned, some had climbed through the window, and others had rushed out onto the lawn, but it was dark and it had begun to rain. Between his screams, the victim raged and raved against the avenger. "It was that hellcat Kitty Winter!" he cried. "Oh, the she-devil! She shall pay for this! She shall pay! Oh, God in heaven, the pain is more than I can bear!"
You should have been a performing artist, sir. Absolutely extraordinary.
Thank you very much, David.
You're
It's very
quite
kind of you to say.
exceptional.
Well, it was lovely working with you.
How do I follow that? Well, Owen told me that when Arthur left school, he came back home to study medicine at the University of Edinburgh. And it was here that he met a teacher who would have a huge impact on his life.
Now, once upon a time, this building was a hospital. It is where Conan Doyle met Joseph Bell. Now, it's the geography department of the University of Edinburgh.
Conan Doyle was quickly asked to help Professor Joseph Bell on the wards and at the outpatients clinic. He took detailed notes on everything Dr. Bell did.
Now, in his autobiography, Doyle talks a lot about his time here at Edinburgh University. And specifically about one man in particular. Now, let's see. There we are. But the most notable of the characters whom I met was one Joseph Bell, surgeon at the Edinburgh Infirmary. Bell was a very remarkable man in body and mind. He was a very skillful surgeon, but his strong point was diagnosis, not only of disease, but of occupation and character. Now, that's what it was, the diagnosis of the occupation and character that I believe had the first real impact on the young Arthur. Because he says later, "It is no wonder that after the study of such a character, I used and amplified his methods when in later life I tried to build up a scientific detective who solved cases on his own merits and not through the folly of the criminal." I wonder who he's talking about. Let's find out. In 1881, Arthur Conan Doyle qualified as a doctor, and he soon headed south for England to set up his practice. But he owed Edinburgh a lot. It was here that he discovered his great love for storytelling. It was here that he met the inspiration for his greatest creation. But it was in England where he would give birth to his great character Sherlock Holmes. So I'm heading south on my journey to discover more about the birth of Sherlock Holmes. I'm on the second part of my journey, my investigation, to discover the mysteries behind the world's greatest detective, Sherlock Holmes. And it's brought me here to Southsea on the south coast of England, because I really want to find out how the character of Sherlock Holmes came into being, and furthermore, what made him a worldwide phenomenon.
Arthur Conan Doyle arrived in this small seaside town in 1882. He quickly set up as a doctor, but with no national health service, it was really hard to make a living. He was desperate for a few bob, and his short stories saved him from hunger.
Now, he says here in a letter to his beloved ma'am, "This morning I got a notice from all the year round that they had accepted the veteran," which is also not a long story, about 2 or 3 guineas, I think. I love the idea that he puts a price on the length of a story. On the other hand, I got the carotid artery back from Chambers. I sent the winning shot to Hogg. It is a capital story and a 7-pounder if he takes it. So, we know that he loves stories. We know he was desperate for money, but it wasn't until 1885 that he began to form the germ of an idea for a very different kind of detective, called Sherlock Holmes.
So to find out how the great detective came to life, I've come to Portsmouth's City Museum, where they house the largest collection of Doyle and Holmes memorabilia in the world. The Lancelin Green Bequest. Its academic director, Neil McCaw, has promised to tell me about the birth of Sherlock Holmes.
He stumbled on the idea of a new detective, a new literary detective. He was dissatisfied with the way in which the detective had been constructed and written about previously, and wanted to do it, and felt he could do it better. And so while he was living in Southsea, working as a doctor, suddenly Holmes comes to life with all his eccentricities, with all his sort of personality traits. Here is a first edition of the very first Sherlock Holmes novel, A Study in Scarlet, which appeared in Beaton's Christmas Annual. Price, it says at the top, 1 shilling. Written not 5 minutes up the road from here.
Can I touch it? Can I open it up?
Of course you can, yeah. Doyle was promised £25 for the world rights. Basically, he signed them away for the whole of his life, because he'd been unsuccessful in trying to market it to a range of other publishers. He accepted £25 for an initial run, but Beaton's never paid him a penny. He claimed at the end of his life that he never received any money in the UK, and he didn't receive any money in the US.
So money-wise, A Study in Scarlet wasn't a great start for Sherlock Holmes. So I suppose it's understandable that Conan Doyle abandoned his new detective to concentrate on a historical novel, Micah Clarke. But as I know from experience, you can't keep a good detective down. Suddenly, I saw a clue to what could be one of the most important moments in the life of Sherlock Holmes.
Now, what are these wonderful little pocketbook diaries in front of me?
Okay, well, these are Conan Doyle's own diaries for the years 1889 and 1890. And why that's particularly interesting to us here in Portsmouth is because he was living in Southsea during those years. And these, the diaries contain some quite mundane and ordinary comments about things he's paid into the bank, but also some more exciting notes about works that he's writing and stories that he's submitted to particular journals. For example, at the end of August 1889, there is a note here on Friday the 30th that says, agreed to write story of 45,000 words for £100 for Lippincott, and that's Lippincott's magazine, which is an American journal. And on the evening before, Conan Doyle had gone for a dinner with the owner-editor of Lippincott's at the Langham Hotel in London, and the editor had asked him if he would write a story for the magazine.
The pocket diaries didn't give much of a clue about what Conan Doyle would write for his £100. But that was by far the most money he had ever been offered for one of his stories. The diaries had given me a lead, and I wanted to find out more about that meeting. So I headed to London and the Langham Hotel itself. Now, when Conan Doyle came here, he must have been giddy with excitement. This was his chance to hit the big time and become a respected author. He knew he was not only going to meet a leading American publisher, but also a literary figure. A man who was both famous and critically acclaimed, the great Oscar Wilde.
Now, the person I'm here to meet is the man who still holds the distinction of being the youngest ever member of the Sherlock Holmes Society. He is also the man who has played Oscar Wilde on stage and on film.
David Heyman, I'd know the back of that head anywhere. How are you, my dear?
Hello.
Lovely to see you.
And I'm looking very like a Paget Sherlock Holmes, actually. You've got the same noble brow, if I can put it that way.
Silver-tongued devil. You've lost a hell of a lot of weight.
Yeah, I'm trying to imitate you and be stringy and mean.
You look fantastic.
Thank you. You're very kind.
So your wanderlust has done it, hasn't
It is. A lot of trotting about, exactly. It's nice to come here as well, this sort of splendid late Victorian feeling, isn't it?
Thank you.
I've added to it, but it's still the Langham. Thank you very much.
Would this be pretty much what it was like in the day?
I think
of the famous dinner?
A little more sort of red ruched and tasselled and Victorian. We're pretty much in the height of Victoriana, aren't we, in the late 80s?
Tell me about that very, very special and very, very important dinner that took place in this very hotel.
Well, there was an American literary magazine called Lippincott's magazine, which I think was based in Philadelphia. But anyway, it was an American magazine, and it was run by a man called J.M. Stoddart. who was over in Britain, talent scouting, really, I suppose you could say, recruiting authors for his magazine. And in fact, he invited to dinner in this very hotel two men who'd never met, the young writer, both actually young, in their 30s, Arthur Conan Doyle, who had written A Study in Scarlet, and Micah Clarke, which is a historical romance, which he was very pleased with. And then there was this blazing talent, Oscar Wilde, this Irishman who had gone to Oxford and established a reputation for himself, even as an undergraduate. At that dinner, two stories arose in the minds, or two commissions were made. A large sum of money was proposed by Stoddart to each, and each met for the first time and really liked each other. And that's the surprise. It tells you a lot about Conan Doyle, and it tells you a lot about Wilde. Conan Doyle we think of because he's got this crisp moustache and these blue eyes, and you might know, if you know anything about his life, that he was a great sportsman as well as a great writer and a doctor. And so you think of him as tweedy and serious and butch, you know. But I think meeting a figure like Wilde, who was a true literary man, a man who had this wisp of Baudelaire and sort of French decadence about him, I think the fact that he approved of Conan Doyle, because he was a very sharp critic, Wilde. I mean, sharp in the best sense of the word, acute. And I think that, it emboldened Conan Doyle, I think, to write again. That and the money, of course.
I'm quite excited. I think this was potentially one of the most important meals in the history of literature. Oscar Wilde used the commission to write his only novel, A Portrait of Dorian Gray, and Conan Doyle was persuaded to give his detective one more try and write a second Sherlock Holmes story, The Sign of the Four. It went on sale a year later, and readers started to fall for the deductive Holmes, just as a certain Master Fry did 70 years later.
I'd seen one on television, and then the library came. We had a mobile library, lived deep in the country, and there was a mobile library van used to come to about sort of half a mile away from the house. We used to walk to where it would stop, and we'd go in and pick out books. And I remember seeing this Sherlock Holmes and remembering having seen it on television, and I picked it up, and it was the short stories, and I read them. And of course I didn't understand all the words, it was about 8 or 9, I guess. But just once you're there, it's just absolutely, you just, all of them. And yeah, and then I was getting, there was the complete short stories and then the complete long stories, and then I was absolutely hooked.
And he's been an addict ever since. Stephen then used the first story, A Study in Scarlet, to explain Holmes's deductive reasoning and his friendship with Watson.
There's a wonderful scenes when they've just met and they've just moved into Baker Street, and Watson is totally intrigued by Sherlock Holmes because Sherlock Holmes doesn't tell him what he does. He writes this list of things that Holmes can or can't do, his knowledge, and he looks at it and he can't decide it. And there's one breakfast where he's reading an article written by someone in the newspaper. And this article basically says, and this goes to the heart of Sherlock Holmes, I think, he says that logic is the supreme tool from which you can deduce almost anything. Mm-hmm. He said, for example, a pure logician, on being presented with a drop of water, should be able to infer the existence of either the Niagara or the Atlantic without having heard of either. Just through logic. And Watson puts down the paper and says, "What ineffable twaddle." It is a fabulous phrase, ineffable twaddle.
Ineffable twaddle sounds more Stephen Fry than Watson. Watson may have disagreed with him, but Holmes's theories continue to enthrall.
I don't suppose the day will come in human history when there won't be Sherlock Holmes books in print, and there won't be versions of Sherlock Holmes on stage and whatever equivalent of screen.
Isn't that a lovely thought?
It is a marvellous thought. I think he is one of the truly
very
eternal.
Special, yes.
Yeah.
Stephen, I could listen to you for days. And it's been lovely to see you.
Thank you. Pleasure
Thank you
to
very
see
much
you.
for coming.
Thank you, my dear friend.
That was just fantastic. What an enthralling, beguiling, captivating individual. It was pure privilege and a truly insightful evaluation of the importance of Sherlock Holmes. Conan Doyle was so excited by his new commission and the fact that he'd found out that Oscar Wilde was a fan, that he began to write the next Sherlock Holmes adventure, and this is where he really hit the ground running. But, you know, when you read the first page, it sounds like something more out of an Irvine Welsh novel than something from a distinguished Victorian author.
Sherlock Holmes took his bottle from the corner of the mantelpiece and his hypodermic syringe from its neat Morocco case. With his long, white, nervous fingers, he adjusted the delicate needle and rolled back his left shirt cuff. For some little time, his eyes rested thoughtfully upon the sinewy forearm and wrist, all dotted and scarred with innumerable puncture marks. Finally, he thrust the sharp point home, pressed down the tiny piston, and sank back into the velvet-lined armchair with a long sigh of satisfaction. 3 times a day for many months, I had witnessed this performance. Now, that is actually quite extraordinary, because that makes Holmes a pretty serious drug user. But in Victorian England, it wasn't really uncommon, and nor was it illegal. They were the bad old days. Without a doubt, Sherlock Holmes wasn't a restrained Victorian gentleman. So I wanted to know more about his wild nature. Luckily, the author and historian Kate Williams has agreed to tell me about the great detective's dark side.
I think we have this vision of Sherlock Holmes as rather dry, as this man and his deer stalker who lives in Baker Street and someone for all the family. But really, this is a scandalous man. He's a drug addict, he breaks the law, he's wild, he's bohemian, and he lives in an absolute tip. I mean, this is the time when we imagine it all being terribly respectable, but really, Holmes is a fantasy-actor figure. He's living on the edge.
These books were being published at a time when there were huge advances in education, a huge rise in literacy. So people were beginning to devour the publications, the magazines, the novels and things. And also there were great advances in printing, wasn't there?
Conan Doyle was in the right place at the right time. This is a great upsurge in newspapers, in magazines, in cheap books, and the demand for this type of book as well. Literacy and novels, it's no longer something for the leisured upper classes, for ladies to do, to show off their literacy. As literacy grows, servants, the entirety of the Victorian working mass, they want to read stories, and most of all what they want are stories about murder. True
yes,
crime.
The salacious, the
Exactly.
sensational
yes, true
crimes.
crime was hugely popular. And what's very interesting about Victorian London is that the autopsy reports, we would find them shocking because they are so specific in terms of exactly what is done to these women. And there are a lot of theories saying...
Were they published? Were those reports,
yes, you
those
could read
descriptions
them.
published?
You could read them. Whereas for us, we would be more interested perhaps in the sexual aspect. You know, did he attack these women? Did he rape these women? Did he use them as prostitutes? That, for the Victorians, no mention of it. What they're fascinated by are the bloody, gory details. They don't care about sexual crimes. They want to read about murder. And there were lots of jokes saying that there are all these books being published for housemaids with their feet in the fire and coachmen who just want to sit there reading about the latest shocking crime in the back streets. They loved it. So what Conan Doyle, in a sense, is giving us is these mysteries solved because no one knew who did so many of these crimes. So there were so frequently crimes that were just never solved, particularly of low-class people. No one even bothered. But Conan Doyle, over and over again, keeps showing us that these crimes can be solved and the world can be understood, whereas that wasn't what the Victorians found at all.
You know, it seems to me, or certainly how he comes across, Sherlock, is a truly modern crime fighter, this mad, eccentric genius who could solve any crime of the day. He used his super deductive powers to catch the bad guys.
But how were London's real detectives dealing with criminals? That's got to be my next step.
Hi there. For the last few days, I've been on a journey to discover who Sherlock Holmes was, the world's greatest fictional detective. But actually, now I fancy finding out about the real detectives of the day.
In 1842, the Metropolitan Police took 8 bobbies off the beat and put them into plain clothes. Shazam! You're now detectives. But could it be that easy? Well, at the Royal Courts of Justice, Professor Clive Emsley had the answers.
Now tell me, you're a historian of the police, aren't you?
I am indeed, yeah.
Now, one thing that intrigues me, why was Sherlock Holmes so disparaging of detectives?
Well, all policemen were basically working class men. The overwhelming majority of police officers actually patrolled beats. There are very, very few detectives in the Metropolitan Police. The only way you can become a detective is by starting out as a working class beat patrolman.
So when did they begin to bring in, say, like medical science, ballistic science? When did all that start to come in?
Well, medical science, there are ways of investigating a dead body, looking for arsenic, seeing whether someone's been drowned or whatever. There are doctors who can do that in the 1820s, 1830s.
As early as that?
Oh, yeah. But it's not something, obviously, that a detective does. But he might, or any kind of police officer, might bring someone in to investigate a crime.
And that happened that early in the century? They would bring in the specialist?
No, they'd bring in the specialist, yeah. But the idea of a detective doing it himself, as Holmes does, is well, basically that doesn't happen. They don't have that kind of equipment. They don't have that kind of equipment within police forces until basically the interwar years.
And even though the British police didn't follow the lead of Sherlock Holmes, the long arm of the great detective reached out over the channel.
The man, Edmund Lockhart, who runs the police detective training centre in Lyon for French judicial policemen in the interwar period. Lockhart says that all of his detectives should be like Sherlock Holmes. And he writes an article around about 1929, 1930, in which he begins by saying that I tell all of my students they must be like Sherlock Holmes because every offender, whatever he touches, leaves a trace, and they must find that trace.
Does that give us an idea of what it is about Sherlock Holmes that is so endearing, so enduring? I mean, over 100 years, he's been the most famous detective in the world. Why is he so loved?
Well, I think it is because he does what we really like to think a detective can do. That he can say, oh yes, that man has served 24 years in the army, most of it in India, but 2 weeks in Egypt, simply by looking at the way he walks and the way he bites his fingernails.
Clive, that is fantastic. That has been really, really helpful.
Okay.
Thank you very much and good luck.
Pleasure. And you.
Take care.
Brilliant. He must have been a great detective if the French police used Sherlock Holmes as a model for real detective work. But Holmes would never have existed without his friend and assistant, Dr. Watson, who reported nearly all the cases Holmes solved. The second story, The Sign of the Four, was published in 1890. But the pair of them might have had a very short life if it hadn't been for a series of short stories that were published the following year in a monthly magazine called The Strand. And I needed to see some. So my investigation took me to Marylebone Library to meet Catherine Cook, the librarian, and a member of the Sherlock Holmes Society.
This is where we keep our Sherlock Holmes collection, which is pretty much unique. It is certainly the only one in public hands in London. Books, periodicals, and this is the Strand magazine.
Oh, bound copies.
Yes. The first short story to appear in the Strand, which is A Scandal in Bohemia, and that is the first picture by Sidney Paget of Holmes and Watson.
They're fantastic.
And that's what set the image of Holmes, really down to today.
Now, Catherine, what I really want to ask you about Watson.
and how crucial he was to the success of the Sherlock Holmes stories.
Watson was a normal person. He was an educated man, he was a doctor. He'd served in the army, he'd actually served in Afghanistan. He had a wife, and he had friends. He played billiards with people, he went and bet on the horses and knew he shouldn't. Whereas Holmes is an isolated character. He only really has Watson as a friend. So Watson is the one thing that can humanise Holmes. Even when he's at home with his wife and he's got his medical practice, if Holmes needs him, he gets a peremptory summons. It's Holmes, if convenient, come at once, if inconvenient, come all the same.
Yes, I love it here. He appears in the dead of night and said, okay, drop everything, leave your practice, leave your wife, leave your family and come and help me.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that.
But
That's true friendship.
It is, and it's a plea for help. Holmes needs Watson in that sense.
So he wouldn't have been as successful a character without his buddy Watson?
No, he wouldn't.
Do you think that Watson was the first of the true kind of sidekick detectives?
Yes, absolutely. Conan Doyle invented that aspect of it, and he has been said that he invented it because it's what he himself as a doctor knew. It was a medical recording technique. So he was watching a professor, Joseph Bell in medical terms, Sherlock Holmes in detective terms, and then writing it down as one would write down case notes. So it's Conan Doyle's training as well as his professor that helped bring about the stories.
Now, if Joseph Bell was the inspiration for Holmes, who do you think was the inspiration for Watson?
I think personally it was Conan Doyle. There were other people. He had a friend called John Watson, but I think largely Watson was Conan Doyle himself.
Wow, that's a fascinating insight. And if Catherine's right, it means the brilliantly deductive Sherlock Holmes, who was inspired by Doyle's teacher, Joseph Bell, is written about by Dr. Watson, who is really Conan Doyle. Now that makes what Owen Dudley Edwards said to me back in Edinburgh pretty clear now. Of course he could write them off the top of his head. He knew exactly what both men would do and say. Now I feel my detective work is beginning to show results. With what I've uncovered so far, I can now understand why Doyle got bored of Sherlock Holmes. It was all too easy. There was no challenge. I mean, look, in just a couple of years, Doyle had written 22 Holmes adventures. And by 1893, he wanted more time to concentrate on his serious literary books, like Micah Clarke. And how he was going to find that time is a speciality of the author and historian Matthew Sweet.
By the time Doyle is writing The Final Problem, Holmes has mutated rather a lot since those early days of Study in Scarlet and The Sign of Fall. So by the time we're at the end of the second volume of short stories, Holmes has become almost a kind of super being. So you need somebody as super as him to be a worthy adversary. We couldn't have him just brought down by any of these domestic villains.
And there was only one person that fitted the bill. The Napoleon of crime, the arch-villain, Professor Moriarty.
He's Holmes's twin in some ways. He's the opposite.
Two sides of the one coin.
Absolutely, yeah. He's really the dark side of Holmes to some extent.
That's great, yes.
He has to be like that because really I think he's there mainly to kill Holmes. He's there to express all of Doyle's negative feelings about this character who he felt increasingly his literary life anyway, was being dominated by. And that's why he has to be the kind of man that he is, I think. He has to be a worthy opponent. But he's brought in for that story, The Final Problem, which is the one that Doyle intended to be the last Sherlock Holmes story.
Yes, until there was a huge public outcry.
Absolutely.
Saying,
but he's brought on, in a way, simply to push Holmes off the edge of that waterfall, down to their mutual deaths. We couldn't have him just brought down by any of these domestic villains that he encounters in the story. We couldn't have Holmes's nemesis can't be somebody like Dr. Grimesby Roylott, the man with the dodgy menagerie and the collection of baboons and poisonous snakes. He's got to be somebody who is almost godlike, because otherwise it would seem like a terrible anticlimax, and it absolutely isn't, is it? I mean, it's the greatest cliffhanger, isn't it? I mean, almost a very literal cliffhanger.
Yes, in a literal sense. Yeah.
In literature.
So what Doyle thought was his final Sherlock Holmes story The Final Problem, where he and Moriarty plunged to their deaths, was published in 1893. It caused uproar. Fans of the stories wore black armbands and protested in the streets. Yet it was nearly 10 years before Sherlock pulled a Dirty Den and Bobby Ewing stunt by returning from the dead. And when he did, he found himself a star of the stage as well. My search for Sherlock Holmes is nearly over, but no investigation into a fictional detective can be complete without a visit to the British Library and a meeting with the curator of the Arthur Conan Doyle collection, Rachel Foss, who has unearthed some rarely seen gems that will provide vital evidence into the mystery of Holmes.
It's fantastic to touch things, isn't it? You know,
yes.
That someone as famous as Conan Doyle was actually handled and written in over 100 years ago.
Yes, you get a very sort of immediate sense of these things as affective items, not simply, records with historical and literary content, but actually as items attached to, a living, breathing person.
This is his diary from 1892, and it says, received £22, 7 shillings and 9pence, being balance of American money for first 6 Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
£22 for 6 stories, wow.
The collection has over 20 diaries belonging to Conan Doyle. He got paid by the word for his writing. And I find out how hard he worked.
The Refugees, 70,000 words.
Yes.
The Great Shadow, 40,000. Adventures of Silver Blaze, 7,000. So his total is 214,000 words.
In a year, yes.
We then started rummaging through Doyle's letters. And I suddenly got proof of how little he thought of his detective.
He's divided them into various categories, starting with the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, which he calls, interestingly, the police romances. Then he lists his historical novels.
How curious that he calls them the police romances.
I've not seen that anywhere else, actually. I don't know if you have.
I hadn't. But police romances? What a put-down for the world's greatest detective, who by now was starring on stages around the world.
One of the things he talks about is a play of Sherlock Holmes, which was produced by William Gillette.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was the American actor, wasn't he? And producer, yeah.
That's right.
Good week of the play, beating all records and ending with £265, an absolute full house. Queen was there Saturday, King next week.
Yeah.
Wow! That's brilliant, isn't it?
The William Gillette stage play toured Europe and America for over 30 years. They must have performed to hundreds of thousands of people, and such a vital visual portrayal of Sherlock Holmes must have helped to increase his popularity. But as I know, these days TV is the home for most fictional detectives.
Now I've got a real treat. I'm going to meet a very dear friend of mine and my partner in crime over
the last 10 years and a prolific writer in her own right, Linda LaPlante. Beware, she's a beast. Hello, honey.
Hello.
Oh, it's lovely to see you.
Nice to see you.
Too long, honey. You're looking fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
I know.
you.
But flattery gets me everywhere.
I know.
Linda, I've been on an extraordinary journey this week, sweetheart. I'm trying to discover the magic ingredient that has made Sherlock Holmes potentially the world's greatest fictional detective, and the enduring love and admiration that people have for him. What do you think that magic is?
You know, I've been really thinking about this ever since I knew you wanted to ask me about it. And I think it's double fold because, truthfully, I think we would have had the deerstalker and the pipe and the almost farcical detective through the early films we have of him. Not the written word, not the books. I'm talking about the film.
The representations.
The representation of Sherlock Holmes. And then Jeremy Brett created, to me, the most amazing character. And he had every nuance that I am sure Conan Doyle would have, cried for. A superlative, multi-level performance, but also young.
Do you think any of the current crop of detectives, Mike Walker, Jane Tennyson, do you think they will ever last as long as Sherlock, long after you've gone, I've gone, and we're kicking up the daisies?
Truthfully, there was a chance that Jane Tennyson might have remained a kind of good memory of a police procedure and a police detective, but, they made her drunk. Even your good self, if in 10 years' time somebody will say, oh, I'm going to put the scar over my eye like David Heyman did, I don't think so. And I think he remains above it. You can't damage him.
So that's it, folks. My last contributor, my final interviewee. So have I solved the riddle, answered my challenge as to who I believe Sherlock Holmes is?
No mention of it.
I've been deeply, deeply privileged. I've spent time with professors, historians, curators, artists, writers, and perhaps above all, fans of Sherlock Holmes. And they all have their own opinions as to what makes him special. In fact, he had a fierce, fierce intelligence, great powers of deductive reasoning and observation. And of course, we can't forget his immortal sidekick, Dr. Watson. But to get an answer, I think you actually have to put Sherlock Holmes in the context of the period in which he was operating. The tail end of the 19th century in this country and around the world, and the beginnings of the 20th century were a time of great change in the world, great turbulence. And at times of great change like that, I think human beings feel deeply insecure. They need something to hold on to, something to give them hope. So what we look for is an individual who's perhaps more intelligent than us, smarter than us, and perhaps even braver than us. So, in a very, very simple way, my humble answer is probably that Sherlock Holmes was the world's first superhero, and he also wore a cape. Thanks for being with me.